Simple question, as all the best questions are, why are political and media elites so dedicated to bringing in cheap foreign labor to replace Canadian workers here? Not all Canadian workers. I mean, heaven forbid we bring in cheap foreign labor to replace their jobs as journalists or politicians or lawyers. I don't know if you ever saw this campaign ad by Ted Cruz, imagining if lawyers were hopping the border from Mexico, that would get the Democrats upset. But no. I'm talking about bringing in cheap labor to undercut our blue-collar workers. Like this story in the Globe and Mail this week. Ban on temporary foreign workers in New Brunswick pressures food producers. Well, I certainly feel bad for food producers if they're feeling pressure. And I'm about as sympathetic to Mexican workers as you'd expect me to be, which is no more and no less sympathetic than I would be towards Bangladeshi workers or workers in Madagascar, which is I mean them no harm. And I wish them well, as much as I'd wish any of the world's 7 billion people well, but they are not my problem. We have our own problems in Canada. And let me show you some of these problems. Here is the official labor statistics out of New Brunswick. Take a look there at a chart. A year ago, unemployment in New Brunswick was 8%. 2 months ago, in March, it was 8.8%. Not great. You can see that Canada was slowly sliding into a recession, especially in New Brunswick, where Trudeau killed a $15.7 billion construction project for the Energy East pipeline. That one pipeline would have literally given a job to every single unemployed man and woman in the entire province if they wanted it. Trudeau preferred OPEC oil, though. So unemployment was 8.8% in March. And then April, the last month for which we have statistics, it jumped by half. Literally up 4.4 percentage points to 13.2% unemployment. That is shocking. And that's April. We're 20 days into May now. Things are surely worse. Do you doubt that when we have May's full numbers, they're going to be, 16% unemployment? It's 16% unemployment right now in Newfoundland. Do you doubt they're going to hit 20% unemployment next month? When you have 20% unemployment, that is Great Depression, dirty 30s numbers. And Newfoundland was already an economic disaster. They literally wrote a letter to Justin Trudeau this spring saying they're bankrupt. Imagine them now. Okay, back to New Brunswick, because that's the big Globe and Mail story. 47,200 unemployed people in New Brunswick now. And remember the definition of that. That's someone who's actually looking for a job. That doesn't include people who've just given up and stopped looking for a job. They're no longer counted as part of the labor force. And look at that too. The labor force participation rate has fallen by 5% in the past year. Do you see that? So it's 13.2% unemployment amongst those who are still looking. But add in the 5% who has just given up. They've quit looking. You're almost at 20% right now if you include them. So back to that headline in the Globe and Mail. Before we even read the story, ban on temporary foreign workers in New Brunswick pressures food producers. Let me read a bit. George Dukeshire is a third-generation farmer who grows 24 varieties of apples, along with pears and plums, in his orchard alongside the St. John River in western New Brunswick. In half a century of farming, he's seen huge ups and downs. Now he's not sure how he'll weather the coming season, unquote. You see what they're doing? Third-generation farmer, apples and pears and plums, half a century on the land. We have to stand with this great, patriotic, hardworking Canadian salt of the earth. Except for the following 1,000 words. They do the opposite. They use this one man's Canadianness to make the case for bringing in cheap foreign laborers to undercut Canadian workers. I'm serious. Let me read some more. Late last month, Premier Blaine Higgs abruptly announced that temporary foreign workers are banned from entry, the only province in Canada to place such a restriction, which occurred just as spring planting season was about to start. In an instant, a critical part of Mr. Dukeshire's workforce evaporated, while in Mexico, his long-term employees lost their livelihoods. He typically employs 8 workers who return each year. One of them has been coming for 19 years, another for 12. They're experienced and work without supervision, thinning the trees, pruning, making cider, and harvesting. Got it. So Canada's national newspaper, whose very logo is a maple leaf, is going to root for Mexican workers who live in Mexico and jet in to work for a bit before jetting back home to their home in Mexico. Not a word about New Brunswick's unemployed, and there's such a weird implication here, what New Brunswicker could possibly master the intricacies of, pruning apple trees and, picking apples without supervision. Quote, "They know where every tree is on the farm," said Mr. Dukeshire, whose Orchard Shade Farms is near Woodstock, New Brunswick. "They're crucial, essential workers. They're part of the family, and you can't replace them with people off the street. We depend on them, and they depend on us." Yeah, but that's the thing. They're not actually part of your family, are they, Mr. Dukeshire? If they were, they would be living in New Brunswick as citizens, and they'd probably have the protection of Canadian labor laws, including minimum wage if appropriate, or if there was a problem with minimum wages for farm work, maybe they'd be exempt from minimum wage as some farms are, at least until the NDP runs the province. So yeah, that's the point, isn't it? They're not family. You treat family well. Family are living in your country. That's a metaphor he's using. They're not actually family. I'm not sure if it's accurate, and I don't think it's even honest. Hey, if picking apples is essential, and I'm not going to say it isn't, Mr. Dukeshire, why don't you ask the 13.2% of your fellow New Brunswickers if maybe they'd like to pick some apples for you? Apple picking is hard work, but it's also something that people like doing so much that across Canada people actually pay to come to orchards for the pleasure of picking their own. It's not just that the fruit is a bit cheaper that way. It's good, honest outdoors work. It's a bit of physical exercise, like this young lad said he wanted to do before he was laughed at by Trudeau's CBC state broadcaster.
You would see yourself doing in terms of volunteer work or one of the jobs the Prime Minister was talking about?
Honestly, farming sounds quite interesting. I do have a background in athletics.
Yeah, I'll read some more. He cancelled a $10,000 apple tree order from nurseries in Ontario because of a lack of labor, a decision that will affect yields in the years to come. He said production could be reduced to about 25% of capacity this year as a result of the ban. He's not alone. Fruit and vegetable farmers, along with lobster processors who use temporary foreign workers, say New Brunswick's decision is catastrophic, people. And the move was made without consultation. Some farmers say this will result in lower production, less variety, and higher prices of local food. Catastrophic, guys. Hey, guys, if they don't get to fly in Mexican laborers, no one will be able to pick the apples. We just don't know how to pick apples. And lobster processing. I mean, who knows better how to harvest lobsters in New Brunswick than Mexicans? I mean, certainly not New Brunswickers who have been working in fisheries for literally centuries, an industry built by their ancestors. What do they know? Yeah, we need to bring in world-famous Mexican lobster experts. They have secret skills that are just irreplaceable. It's a catastrophe. Look at this. In April, 11,000 such workers arrived, about 2,000 short of last year's numbers, and the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council says the sector is still facing challenges in getting enough workers, including foreign workers. Did you know they were still flying in cheap foreign laborers, even in the middle of this pandemic crisis? You bet they are. And did you know that many of them are actually bringing the virus with them? Take a look at this. 4 temporary foreign workers in British Columbia test positive for COVID-19. Let me read a bit. British Columbia's top doctor says the province has detected 4 cases of COVID-19 among temporary foreign workers who entered the country in recent weeks. All 4 had arrived in BC on different flights, said Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry. The federal government has exempted TFWs from cross-border travel restrictions, citing their critical role in sectors of the economy such as agriculture. Migrant workers must still isolate for 14 days upon arrival in Canada. So they're obviously being treated by Canada's healthcare system. They're here now. 4 different flights. That's a lot of spreading of the virus, isn't it? I thought we were clamping down on flying. I'm just kidding. You and I have to stay in our homes, but foreign apple pickers, front of the line, guys, come right on in. You're essential. You're not, but they are. So at least 4 more cases of the virus flown in. How much longer did those 4 cases make the rest of the province live under lock and key? One day? 1 week? 1 month? To save some corporate farm a few bucks a day in labor costs? And remember, Justin Trudeau announced a $50 million bonanza for temporary foreign workers Trudeau, and by that I mean you, the taxpayer, will pay $50 million to put up these foreign workers in a hotel for a couple weeks when they first arrive as a sort of quarantine. So you see, we're doing this to save money. Yeah. So we're halfway through this Globe and Mail story before we hear the countervailing opinion, not in the form of a quote or any sort of balance, but in a single sentence. New Brunswick's Mr. Higgs announced on April 28th that foreign workers are restricted from entering the province. He cited the risk of outbreaks of COVID-19 as a reason and urged employers to fill the vacant positions with students and unemployed local people. Yeah, how outrageous. What a bigot. Hiring unemployed students? Who are they compared to some Mexican citizen who's been coming up here for years to work for peanuts because we can't have Mr. Dukeshire paying prevailing wages? I even love the photo and the caption they use. Emilio Ramirez Agudo, seen here in Oaxaca in February 2020, works on Strawberry Hill Farm in New Brunswick each year. Okay, so he's in Oaxaca. That's in Mexico. Of course, that's his home. Don't you feel sorry for him? I mean, to hell with New Brunswickers, those bigots, but how about this guy? Farmers and processors say they've tried that, and that even this year there have been few takers. Even if they do manage to hire, productivity rates tend to be lower and attrition higher among local, less experienced workers. On farms, reliable labor is particularly crucial during the key harvest months, just as students may be returning to school or workers called back to their former jobs. Yeah, do you think those excuses hold water now in the pandemic? School's not on. The former jobs are gone. How lazy a journalist do you have to be a stenographer for those excuses and not press the corporate farm to ask them, are any of those excuses afoot today? If they were even legitimate excuses in the past. Well, we can't hire local people. They don't want to work. They want to go back to their other jobs. Really? Don't lie. Don't lie. There's no school on right now. Let me skip ahead. New Brunswick has had 0 new cases of COVID-19 in nearly 2 weeks, and everyone who had the coronavirus that causes the disease has now recovered. That's incredible, isn't it? The Globe and Mail publishes that fact to imply that the province can handle it. It's not in crisis. No, that's the whole point. It's not in crisis precisely because it has closed itself off. That's what Ontario and Quebec and BC would have been like had Trudeau and Theresa Tam closed those provinces off from flights too, from foreign flights, especially from China. There are no direct flights from China to New Brunswick, as there still are every day from China to Vancouver and China and Toronto. That's why New Brunswick is safe. Same with Prince Edward Island. The Globe goes on a bit about how hard it is to train people to pick apples. And then they get a really personal case to humanize it. Not with any of the tens of thousands of poor New Brunswickers wondering how they were going to pay their rent now or make groceries. Globe doesn't really care about New Brunswickers. They're too busy caring for people across the world. Let me read. The impact stretches 5,000 kilometers away to Potrerillo in central Mexico, where Victor Manuel Magin Peña, a father of 3 who comes each year with his uncle, was counting on working at Mr. Livingston's Strawberry Hill Farm. The income helps to get ahead and to feed my family and provide supports for his children to study, he said. In Mexico, it is very difficult to survive. Now, I do feel bad for Mexico and Mexicans. I do. And I feel bad for people in Namibia and Tonga and Peru. But I am not from those places, and I don't want our laws made to cater to them. New Brunswick's job is to be a home for New Brunswickers, and its laws and policies should care for its own people. It was bizarre in the first place to bring in foreign cheap laborers to undermine their own people, but to do so now, when there is a health danger and 13.2% unemployment, that's downright immoral. Well, maybe they could find someone in Toronto at the Globe who supports Mexico over New Brunswick. Surprise! Health concerns can be addressed by proper checks and balances, said Erica De Ruggiero, director of the Center for Global Health at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health in Toronto. If federal and provincial guidelines are implemented and monitored and physical distancing and other protocols followed, if all those things are working in tandem, then I think the risks are being mitigated, she said. I think it's really unfortunate that workers who were expecting to come and the farmers who were expecting to have them come were left out. I think she's so right. But what about New Brunswickers who are being left out? I mean, if that's the business we're in, making people feel good about themselves, not making them feel left out of their own country, how about that? Look at this pure propaganda here. Mr. Dukeshire, the apple grower, said the decision to shut out laborers has made an already stressful situation even worse. These people are labeled wrong, he says. They're not migrant workers. They're not foreign workers. They're professional harvest workers. And they're professional farmers. We just can't do it without them. But they are, Mr. Dukeshire, in law and in fact, they are foreign workers. The program is actually called temporary foreign workers. They are migrant workers. They migrate to Canada from Mexico. The close picture of the farmer was taken in Oaxaca, Mexico. Look, I know you like to save a few bucks, Mr. Dukeshire, and I know you put foreigners ahead of your neighbors. I get it. And I know you don't want to train your neighbors about the intricacies of picking apples. I don't know, you think they're too stupid or too lazy or too unreliable or something. Or maybe you just have come to like your Mexican laborers. You don't like them enough to help them to become citizens because, of course, that would mean you couldn't pay them cut rates that you can only pay foreigners. But you still love them. I mean, that's what you say. No. Loving someone because you can take economic advantage of them is not true love. It's you loving yourself, Mr. Dukeshire. I'm sorry, these farmers are a disgrace. And so is the Globe and Mail for defending them. Me? I have no will towards Mexico or Moldova or Montenegro, and I hope they have no ill will towards me. And neither would I expect those countries to put me or any other Canadian first in their national plans to recover from this pandemic and the economy that's being flattened. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.